Hi, it's Victor Perton here, and it's the Optimism Cafe. And today I am delighted. Professor Glenn Levine is joining us from Texas. Glenn, g'day.
Victor, absolute pleasure to speak with you. We've already chatted about how much of a fan I am of Australia and Australian people.
Well, your former governor, Perry, once said to me that Texas is the lost tribe of Australia. So there's that natural affinity. And we've got an incredible affinity with you, Glenn, because you have just chaired the American Heart Association study on mental well-being and its connection to heart health. Glenn, what we always do at the Centre for Optimism, our first question to any guest is, what makes you optimistic?
So let me address that first by what actually makes me optimistic. And the things that lead me to be optimistic is that I have learned, or at least trained myself, to try to focus on the positive and positive things and try to get enough control of my mind and how it thinks to not focus on the negatives. And that clearly sets up a general, more optimistic attitude. If you ask me what is the thing that makes me optimistic, it is the fact that we can learn to be less pessimistic and more optimistic by appreciating the things around us rather than the things that we don't have.
Yeah, brilliant. Gratitude as an underpinning of optimism is so important. Glenn, one of the affinities we've got beyond, our general optimism is you've chaired this incredible group of people at the American Heart Association to produce a scientific statement that makes the connection between mental well-being and heart health. And one of the fundamentals of your report is about the role of optimism in heart health. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you started this project and how you got that group of great scientists together to make those conclusions?
Well, the genesis of this is I was asked by one of the world's most famous cardiologists, Valentin Fuster, to give a talk at about a 2,000 person symposium on psychological health, of which at the time I knew nothing. So I quickly had to become an expert on this. And what I was amazed about was just how much good quality data there actually was that tied psychological health, both negative and positive, to heart health and cardiovascular risk. And as we outlined in our scientific statement, there really is a good amount of data. Negative psychological health is associated with and plausibly leads to increased cardiovascular risk and worse outcome. And on the flip side, there is actually some really neat data that positive psychological health, including things like happiness, optimism, gratitude, and other things, in pretty well done studies are associated with better cardiac outcome, including things like decreased mortality. That really amazed me. Because of these findings, I thought we needed to get out to the world some of these findings and the importance of us as cardiologists and healthcare providers to really focus not only on things like blood pressure, cholesterol, and diabetes, but actually on the patient's psychological health. So we asked the AHA to commission the scientific statement, which they did. We spent about 6 months preparing the statement. It went under relative reviews. And here we are today, and we are extraordinarily gratified by the end product, and we're hoping that this serves to get the message out that psychological health and things like optimism really matter to heart health.
It's a great read. I was actually sharing it on a conversation this morning with people from around the world. And what we've on our website, we've included the studies from Harvard, the American military, Boston University on longevity. There's good evidence from Vienna around sleep and optimism. Really good material on the slowing down even of dementia through optimistic mindset. So from your perspective, from the group that you chaired, what's the good evidence? What are the conditions in which optimism plays a role in either being preventative or slowing down the onset of degenerative diseases?
So if I talk about optimism as well as other facets of positive psychological health, again, including gratitude, sense of purpose, and things along that nature. I think the first thing that becomes clear to us, and some of the psychiatrists and psychologists on the panel were clear to point out, is that these are not just the opposite side of the coin. It's not pessimism or optimism. It's not depression or happiness. But these are actually distinct states above just sort of being neutral. So optimism is more than just the lack of pessimism. Happiness is more than just the lack of depression. So these are distinct entities. And what we find again and again is in people who have these positive psychological factors, including optimism and others, the associations are really profound. Less risk of heart attack, less risk of cardiovascular mortality, and in some cases, overall, greater likelihood of long-term survival. And these are not not studies published in obscure journals. These are studies published in the leading in national and international journals, and they're well done studies at that. So we are pretty convinced the evidence is real.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me in Harvard's report, for instance, is they now think it's a public health issue, that the increased levels of pessimism in the world because the news has changed. As Steven Pinker from Harvard says, you've got this constant 24/7 bad news. You've actually got a diminution in optimism in the world. And I recently did an interview with the lead scientist at Morneau Chappell, leading wellbeing company, and they talked about this factor. So do you think, there's a public health purpose now or need to help people understand what makes them optimistic and that connection between optimism and good health?
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever. I mean, certainly the timing of when this scientific statement came out, now 10 months into COVID, could not have been better. Clearly, people are more isolated, they're more depressed, they're staying in longer. There is incredible economic stress that people are undergoing. So there's certainly more than ever challenges to maintaining an optimistic attitude. And so I think it's more important than ever to emphasize the potential benefits of optimism, as well as some potential ways that people can potentially become more optimistic, happier with their lives, and have a better outlook on the future.
Now, one of the interesting parts of your scientific statement is you actually make a connection that there's actually a scientific explanation for why, positive states of mind improve heart health. Do you want to share that a little bit with our Center for Optimism members?
Yeah, so this is a key part of our investigation, because if we just found random associations, well, that's nice, but that really doesn't take things to the next level. And so what I think is important is trying to figure out, are these just statistical associations that we happen to see, or is there what we call a biologically plausibility, whereas negative states increase cardiac risk and decrease its prognosis, and positive states like optimism and happiness can actually contribute to decreased risk. And so there's multiple potential pathways, and those consisted of things like biologic pathways, particularly things like inflammation, sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, and other factors. There's obviously psychological and behavioral things. Are people who are happier and more optimistic versus pessimistic and depressed? Are those people more likely to take their medicines? The answer is certainly yes. Are they more likely to care about the future and be interested in the future? and so go for preventive screening and follow up on their appointments? The answer is certainly yes. Are they more likely to not smoke or try to stop smoking? Are they more likely to exercise regularly? Are they more likely to watch their weight or watch their diabetes? And the answer certainly seems to be yes. And when you take this to the next step, well, what can we see and what do we see? Well, less smoking, potentially lower blood pressure, potentially better glucose management, potentially watching your diet so you don't give yourself too much salt intake and heart failure. All these things, biologically, plausibility, uh, lead to decreased cardiac risk. So you're probably less likely to develop heart disease. And then in people who already have heart disease, we get into the area of secondary prevention, where we want them to take the meds, we want them to stop smoking, we want them to follow up so we can control their blood pressure. And again, what is suspected, and there's some data to support this, is that positive, optimistic people are more likely to do these things than depressed or those with negative feelings and emotions. So we think there's a pretty good chain we've put together. And for those who look at the publication, we've put together a nice figure that really sort of sums up how we think all these things fit in, from just associations to actual causative mechanisms, and how they can actually lead to less risk of developing heart disease or dying from heart disease.
Absolutely brilliant. And I sent it to my own general practitioner in Melbourne, and I've sent it to a lot of the doctors who are members of the Centre for Optimism. One of the really interesting things I found in your report was the suggestion that there's some really good questions that both the clinician and their reception staff can use. So we, of course, the Centre for Optimism, our central theme is to ask people what makes them optimistic. And we've asked that, like you, of presidents and prime ministers and people digging ditches in India. What are those questions that you think doctors should be asking of their patients, but more importantly, that reception staff should be asking as the people come in?
Yeah. So I will be honest, we've given the specific suggestions in the paper. I don't have it in front of me, but off the top of my head, the things that we suggest along those lines are certainly, if you are speaking with a patient who's not taking their medicines, who's just telling you they feel tired all the time, they don't feel like doing anything, but there's not really a clear physiologic reason. They're not in heart failure, they don't have heart blockages. Certainly that should lead one to be concerned. Are they depressed? Are they down? Are they pessimistic? And simple questions like reflecting and saying, I'm getting the sense that you seem a little bit down or depressed. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? The key is not to ask challenging questions, but the key is to ask very open-ended and sympathetic questions, acknowledging that they may not be in the best of states, empathizing with that, and sort of opening the door without pushing them to see if they want to discuss this more. And I think what you find is when you do this, many patients are actually relieved that someone is asking about these things. Now, all of us are not psychologists, all of us are not psychiatrists, all of us are not comfortable or familiar with putting people on the many different drugs that are available. But certainly this opens the door for a discussion and potentially a referral if needed to mental health. In addition, though, to drugs, we know there are many programs that focus on decreasing stress and increasing your appreciation of the positive. And certainly those, I think, are fair game to mention to patients, even at our level as non-psychologists or non-psychiatrist practitioners. Would you be interested in some good programs that are focused on improving your optimism or your happiness, or decreasing your level of stress, or things like mindfulness and meditation programs that get you better understanding how you're thinking and subsequently allow you to better focus and control your thinking, doing things like thinking about the positives and the good things in life rather than just endlessly remunerating about past events or things in the future you're worried about that are in all likelihood never even going to happen.
Yeah, we love on the question side. One of the interventions we do is to get people to stop asking, "How are you?" You know, in Australia, typically people say, "G'day, how are you?"
Yeah.
And the answer is 50% of the time, not bad or not too bad.
Yeah.
And the French are the same. So it's a sort of a wasted question, wasted answer. And so I train people, instead of saying, "How are you?" to say, "What's the best thing happening?" or "What's the best thing in your day?" And I actually did an interview on New Zealand radio where the guy said, "Look, I've been imitating this guy for a year. All of my customers know that when I come in, I expect a positive story before we get down to the what's right and what's wrong." So that opening question is fantastic. Now, you mentioned a number of really good interventions there, and I saw the Vienna Medical School late last year. Their view was the My Best Self. You know, the imagining exercise where you think of yourself in a year's time, write for 10 minutes and then contemplate it, and do that every 6 months or so was very good. Although I did an interview with some professors from Sussex just before Christmas who were getting people to do it every day, which I think was probably a bit much. The other one is of course, gratitude journals and reading them first thing in the morning. But we've also produced a thing on habits. You know, we say to people, smile, just as you do, Glenn. You know, just smiling at strangers lifts people, laughing every day, reading humor. All of these things are so fantastic. And when I look at what you do, I mean, you're a professor, you're a doctor, but you also engage in pet rescue and dog rescue. And I saw in your past writings, your associations between pet care and good health. So what are your tips and tricks? What do you do to keep yourself optimistic? And what can people learn from, you know, a master clinician like you and a teacher like you on keeping more optimistic?
Well, I tell you, for about the last 10 years, I've been doing meditation, something that surprises me because I was about the most type A interventional cardiologist, not sort of a granola-y, tree-hugging kind of guy in the world. But I got into it, and I find it great as far as remaining mindful and really learning how to focus myself on the now, on appreciating what's going now, and then just not getting bogged down by negative things, but thinking about positive things down the road. So it really has given me personally a much better control of my mind than most of us have, because most of us, we just perseverate about the past or worry about the future. And that has really been my trick. You mentioned pets. Yeah, there's actually some good data that dogs actually are great for decreasing the negatives in psychological health and improving the positives. And we have 3 rescues, and I've had dogs and rescue dogs my whole life. So those are some of the tricks that I use. And then perhaps one of the wisest things I heard is it's a Eastern saying that probably comes out of probably Thailand and probably some Buddhist thought in there. And the saying is, we can make ourselves happy or we can make ourselves sad. It takes an equal amount of energy to do either, and the choice is up to us. And so in essence, what it tells us is we can sit here and we can actually impact our happiness and optimism by what we think about. And it takes no more effort than sitting here and ruminating about negative thoughts or worrying about what may or may not happen in the future, or kicking ourselves for something that happened 20 years ago. It's a really interesting approach that I really endorse, and would suggest to others.
Meditation is so powerful. I've recorded a few myself. The the Buddhist compassion meditation, which is said to be 3,000 or 4,000 years old, this notion of sending out healing thoughts to those that you love, to those who you're friendly with. Then you send it, of course, to people who are probably enemies. But the interesting thing is when I've done it with big groups of men, the hardest thing is actually getting them to have self-compassion.
Yeah.
They always seem to stress when I say, and now think of yourself and, send healing thoughts to yourself. Do you find that is that one of the, in the people you work with, I think blokes often have a hard time being compassionate to themselves. They've always been hard on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're talking about is loving kindness meditation, which is one of the big four meditations. And I will confess it's not my favorite meditation. I did it a little bit. It's good for some. Probably not everyone's a cup of tea, but it is interesting and it is good. And if you do it enough, you actually can sort of change your feelings. And I think it's exactly true what you say. It is a lot easier to be kinder to someone you know or even don't know. And I think the true mental health experts will probably say that the hardest thing is for people to actually try to be kind to themselves. And that's, I think, one of the big themes in a lot of some of the Eastern philosophies that I've read about. Yeah, but clearly it's a challenge.
Although it's common too. I mean, Christianity struggles with this division between hope and optimism. I'm always puzzled when I read theologians saying, you must be hopeful, but optimism is just to be dismissed. But in Judaism as well, there's strong and profound. Rambam, for instance, the great medical practitioner from the Middle Ages, was very strong on optimism and like you, understanding the patient, not just the body, but the mind. And then, of course, my favorite is the 14th century Mother Julian of Norwich, who famously said, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And when I look at your definition of optimism in the report, you could almost be challenging Mother Julian. It's this notion of, not every black thing has a silver lining. Not every bad event is good, but it's this belief that things will work out in the end. It is so profound. Glenn, as I said, I read your report. I just thought, God, these guys are genii. And the more I talk to you, the more I smile and laugh, just the infectious nature of your optimistic leadership. So at your school, Baylor Medical School, are you producing a generation of optimistic doctors?
We're working on it. We're working on it. I think things are I think there's light at the end of the tunnel also.
A beautiful phrase. So maybe you can ask all your students what makes them optimistic and produce the Baylor Book of Optimists. What do you reckon?
As far as producing a book on it, I love the idea, and it's something I'm going to seriously consider. I just put out one book already on getting back control of your mind, but that's a great idea for a second book.
Well, I reckon it'd be Glenn's Book of Optimism has to be the next one. Glenn, you have been so generous with your time. Look, when I look at the 6 months you spent during COVID, shepherding a group of the most intelligent doctors in America to share this wisdom with the world. On behalf of the Center for Optimism, I want to thank you and your team. And I want to thank you today, and whatever we can do to support your cause over the decades to come, we make that commitment to you, Glenn. So thank you for joining us today in the Optimism Cafe.
Yeah, no, Victor, thank you for inviting me. And I must say, I love what you're doing. This is great. This is what the world needs more of. And probably after 10 months of COVID, we need it even more than ever. So on behalf of myself and my colleagues, thank you and your group as well.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode of the Optimism Cafe as much as we did. Oh, that Glenn and his team are inspiring. So look, get involved with the Centre for Optimism, share your optimism, learn more about optimism, and surround yourself with optimists. Our website is centreforoptimism.com. There are easy ways to join up and lots of interesting material and exercises to help enhance your optimism and the optimism of those around you.